This is an exclusive excerpt from the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Spring has sprung, the grass is riz, I wonder where the flowers is. Actually, some places still have snow, but it is spring, and for a lot of people, this is the beginning of the gardening season. Whether you have a large landscaped area or just an urban window box or indoor plants. Christine Milks is a lifelong gardener who also has a regular column called The Constant Gardener in Vista Magazine, which is a publication for a seniors association in the Kingston, Ontario region. Chris joins us via Zoom from Gananoque, Ontario. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us.
Love it.
And full disclosure, we go way back from the days when I was working in Brockville, Ontario, and you were running a flower shop called Flowers and Such by Mills, also in Brockville. That's where we met so many years ago. So thank you for doing this.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So what's the first thing, especially for somebody, and you know me, you know I do not have a green thumb. And I also have some fears of plants, but we won't go there. But that being said, for someone who is thinking, I want to start a garden, or I want to start some plants, or I've purchased a house and I want to build a garden, what's the first thing somebody should do at this time of year to get that situation ready?
If I may quote Douglas Adams, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, don't panic. Gardening is a lot easier than a lot of people want to pretend it is. And it's an interesting question because I have often felt that a lot of horticulturalists try to make gardening harder than it is. And that can be off-putting to people. So this is like a multifaceted question that you've asked me. My mind's going a million miles a minute. It's right down to people being, first-time gardeners being scared to go shopping in a garden center because they don't understand the names of plants. They don't understand like the Latin names. One of my most popular columns in Vista that I've been asked to reprint a couple of times, and I went out and talked to a couple of gardening clubs over the years, and they would ask me, can I bring copies of a column? And it was about horticultural Latin. Horticultural Latin is not real Latin. It's all fake. And first-time gardeners especially need to know that it's fake. So I came up with a list of a lot of Latin names that you would see on a plant label or a tree or shrub label and what it meant. And basically I came with a caveat, like, don't be afraid to go in and this is how you decipher a label. And that's what I realized that, the horticultural industry is slanted against beginners.
Okay, well, having said that, let's step back a little bit. You want to start a garden, but you go into a garden center and you say it's stacked up against starters. How do you even know what you want? Like, what's a good beginner's garden, so to speak?
You need to know your yard. You need to know how much sunlight you're going to get, and that's probably the biggest factor. And I don't care whether you're growing ornamentals or whether you're trying to grow some perennials or trees, or whether you're trying to grow vegetables. So in our part of the world, that means you're probably going to have two different shade levels. In the spring, when your deciduous trees have no leaves, is completely different from high summer when the deciduous trees are fully leafed. So as I say, that's got to be the biggest factor in having a successful garden of whatever kind. The next thing is what kind of soil you're working with. Do you have soil that it's like clay and it has poor drainage? Is it sandy soil that the water runs right through it? What do you have to do to augment the existing soil? And what would be the other thing I would think of? You mentioned about buying a house. It takes you literally, in most parts of Canada, 4 seasons, a full year, before you know what you already exists in your yard. It's, I guess, patience is a gardener's virtue, and patience is a true virtue for the first-time homeowner of an existing property in that aspect. And the current column for Vista is going to talk about peat moss and what peat moss can do for soil, whether it's clay soil from the Canadian Shield or sandy soils. Anyway, that's where I would start. Figure out your sunlight availability and the amount of moisture that's available in your soil.
Okay, so once you figure that out, and again, I'm talking a newbie here. So once you figure
Right.
that out, what does that mean in terms of what you might get? I'm assuming that as there are so many different people, there are so many different tastes in the types of things that you might like to see in your garden, but that doesn't necessarily mean that
Right.
what you want in your garden is going to be successful depending upon whatever climate and shade you have.
Right. And so going back to like walking into a garden center for a first time, again, doesn't matter whether you're shopping for ornamentals, flowering plants, annuals, perennials, or vegetable plants. I've often told people, look at the signage or the plant labels. The information on a label is not a guideline. It's the truth. So if something has a big yellow sun on it and says it's going to grow in full sun, that plant is not going to be successful in shade, no matter how much you want to plant it in the shade in your yard, and vice versa. Anything with like a blue label in a garden center is typically rule of thumb, and I'm all about easy gardening and rules of thumb. Blue signs, blue labels in a plant are always indicating that that plant can only thrive in shade or part shade. That plant, there again, as much as you like, I'm trying to think of a plant, blue sapphire lobelia. As much as you love dark blue lobelia, you can't plant that in full sun, and the label tells you that. So you have to just look at the label, and it's more about color. Thankfully, a lot of the plant growers just assume that the buying public is basically illiterate. So things are based on color in a label or signage. Does that help?
Yes, it does. And for a newbie, again, should someone try to get a variety of plants within a garden for the first time, or stick to one or two just to be safe? Because I'm assuming also that some things don't necessarily go with other things,
Yeah.
especially if they're planted close together.
Right. I think I also need to quote one of my favorite employees in our garden center from years past. She was a retired teacher. She was a wonderful gardener, her personal gardener. And she would often advise customers, she said, well, gardening's nothing but a grand experiment anyway. And she was quite true. If you're not prepared to accept, and I'm hard pressed to call it a failure, if you're not willing to accept
Disappointment?
yeah, then you're probably going to have a hard time gardening. But if you're okay with that, if you're okay with stuff going wrong every now and then, go ahead. Try and plant stuff together if you want. You'll know in a year whether it works or not. And you can always, that's why gardening diaries are tremendous, because they'll tell you what you can grow together and what you can't.
Okay,
A
so
lot. But Peter, and then a lot of information too, getting back to those labels, that's going to tell you the maximum height or the maximum spread of a plant. And so that can help you when you're trying to decide where to plant things. So you need to plant something tall at the back of your plot and something shorter along the front, or it's going to be it's going to be dwarfed.
Okay, so we're just about out of time. So I'm going to ask a quick question here, and that is,
Sure.
and we haven't mentioned anybody who is in an urban dwelling where you only have a balcony or a flower box.
Right.
So if somebody walked into a garden center and you were owning that garden center, and somebody said, I've never done a garden before, but I've got this space. It's not a big space. What should I buy as far as putting something in the ground for the first time?
First off, you can grow anything you want in a window box or a planter on your balcony. It doesn't just have to be something that's a pleasing compilation of flowering plants. Grow some herbs in there. They're just as dramatic and look great with petunias or a canna lily, and yet you'll be able to harvest something off your balcony if you want. And a lot of herbs, for instance, if you let them go to flower, there's some very attractive flowers in them. So I would always advise people to, hey, you know what? If you only have a limited space to garden, combine something edible with something flowering, and you get the best of both worlds. Typically, if you have a small garden plot in a yard, if it's like a townhouse or something, there again it's the same thing. And always remember to plant the tallest stuff at the back and the shortest stuff at the front. A guideline for making a planter has to be advice I read years ago from a company called Proven Winners that does a lot of patented plants. You walk into a garden center and you want to buy plants to fill a pot, fill a small garden. Always think thriller, spiller, filler. The thriller is the expensive, gorgeous plant that's going to be very showy in the middle of a planting. A spiller is anything that's going to trail over like a vine, some sort of an ivy. And a filler, those are those inexpensive box plants, for instance, that give you lots of color. And you plant those in and around your expensive plant, the thriller.
Interesting. So what was that? That was thriller, spiller, and filler. Okay.
Yep.
Got that.
And that makes shopping in a garden center exceptionally easy.
I like that. Okay, so spiller, filler, thriller, spiller, filler.
Yep.
Excellent.
That gives you something that's going to grow tall, something that's going to fill in around the pot, and something that's going to spill over the edge of the pot.
That's great advice. One of the reasons why you are a columnist writing a garden column. And that garden column is in Vista, which is a Seniors Association Kingston Region publication. And Christine, I thank you very, very much for taking the time to be on the program with us. We should have you on more often.
Oh, my pleasure, Peter. Thank you so much for asking.
Christine Milks, who has a regular column called The Constant Gardener in Vista Magazine, a publication for a seniors association in the Kingston, Ontario region.
You've just heard an exclusive excerpt from the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. To hear any or all of the full hour-long shows, visit thestufffile.com. Stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's thestufffile.com. A presentation of Flying Fish Communications.